Good morning, everyone. It is like a high of 68 today. I am wearing a sweatshirt with a little branded Free Methodist Church thing down here. But actually being able to wear a sweatshirt and not sweating that is my love language. I deeply enjoy being able to wear a sweatshirt without having to feel terrible about it. So I don't know if you're cold weather people, but man, I am a cold weather person, so I am loving life right now. As we kind of progress through ordinary time, one of the features of ordinary time is that the gospel readings end up being basically all of Jesus's parables and the teachings of Jesus. You know, each year there's a 3-year cycle to the lectionary. It goes through each of the 3 longer gospels once for each year. Matthew, Luke, and John being the longer ones. Mark is a much shorter gospel, and just about everything that's in Mark is in Matthew and Luke too, or Matthew and Luke also. So we don't cover that as one of the years of the lectionary. So this year, for instance, we're working through Matthew, and when we hit the new year for Advent in just after Thanksgiving in November, then we'll switch over and we'll go back to Luke, and then John, and then it starts all over again. So I've been totally distracted. I mean, I realize there are some great things that I'm totally ignoring in the epistles and in the Old Testament readings. Please go back and read them. And fun fact, there's actually 2 tracks for the OT readings. So we're reading through the ones in Exodus. We're doing the semi-continuous, kind of following through as things go. There's also a complementary set of readings, which is from Jonah. If you've never read the book of Jonah, read it with an eye to laughing at the jokes that are in Jonah. There are times that it is absolutely absurd, and I love it. Go ahead and read Jonah. It's a short book. There's like 4 chapters. You could blitz through it in I don't know. Depends on how fast you read, but less than an hour. So check that out. I'm going to focus on the gospel though this week. And I've got a lot of stuff that could be said about this. I'm going to try and limit myself because I have heard people talk about this parable and parables like it and the concepts related to it for like an hour. I'm not going to do that to you, but I'm also going to try and give you the info. So, I mean, we just read that probably, but I'll summarize the parable just in case you're listening to this later or you want to share it with someone. It's the parable of the kingdom of heaven, who's like a landowner, right? He goes out and he hires a bunch of people to work in the morning. And so he agrees with them the usual daily wage. There's a certain coin or a denarius or whatever. And he's like, hey, I'm going to pay you this much. Sends them out to go work. He goes around mid-morning, sees a bunch of other guys standing idle. They don't have a job yet. So he's like, all right, you go work too. I'll pay you. And they don't agree on a price. He's just like, I'll pay you whatever's right. So he goes out at noon, sees more guys, hires more guys. Guys at 3, sees more guys, hires more guys. Then he goes out at like 5 o'clock, like right before quitting time. And he sees a bunch of guys standing around and no one's hired him yet. So he's like, all right, you guys go out too. And so evening comes, lines them all up. He tells his manager, hey, go pay everyone. So they start at the end of the end of the day. Then they pay him a full day's wage, even though they only worked an hour. And so then they work their way back to the guys who were hired first, and he pays them exactly what he promised. And the guys who were hired first get all angry about it. Because they're like, yo, we were working all day. We worked through the hot part of the day. And you're going to pay us the same amount as you're going to pay those guys over there who just got hired for an hour? Are you kidding me? So they're grumbling about it. And the owner says, look, I didn't do anything wrong. Did you not agree with me that I'd pay you that much? I paid you that much. So take what belongs and just get out of here. Like, I chose to give to them as much as I gave you. Am I not allowed to be generous? Can't I choose what I do with my own stuff? And then Jesus ends it by saying, so the last will be first and the first will be last. And so this parable, there's a couple different ways you can go, right? One of the ways I've heard it preached often is it's a parable about generosity, because they actually have the word generous there in the end, towards the end of the parable. So it's about the landowner. He's got money, he's got property. It's his job to be generous and to take care of other people. So he decides to pay everyone a full day's wage, even if they didn't work the full day. I think that lesson is there. I think that generosity it's a virtue. It's encouraged in Scripture. That's a decent interpretation. I think there are other implications also. So be generous. And if you don't feel like you're a generous person and you decide to go work on that because we read this parable today, great. The parable did its job, at least one of them. There are a couple of quotations from other people, and I realized like my sermons lately have been a lot of me talking. And when I talk, there's usually quotes in the back of my head that I'm thinking of, but I don't often explicitly quote them because I don't want you to get, like annoyed or to have your brains just kind of go like, oh my gosh, he's quoting someone else. I'm getting bored of this. But I realize like it's kind of like showing your receipts. It's showing where you got the stuff that you're talking about. So I'm gonna make an effort to do more of that. And if I start forgetting a couple weeks from now and I go back to just saying it and not quoting and letting you know where I got it, shoot me a text and be like, yo, Pastor Kevin, you're not doing the thing you said you wanted to do. And you told me to bug you. So I'm bugging you. So go ahead and do that. I'll do my best. You can remind me if I forget. There's a guy named Jürgen Moltmann. He's a theologian from a little bit back in the day. Not super old, but, not fully modern either. Like he's not alive now. Of course, now that I say this, I'm doubting this. Someone fact check that. But he wrote a number of treatises. One of them is essentially, the thrust of it is that there's a right to productive work. Right, that we, as part of being given the governorship of the earth by God back in Genesis, when he said, hey, till the earth, take care of the garden. I want you to have dominion over the world. Right, that's the job that God has given us. He's given us work to do. That was part of the creation story. And so Moltmann's arguments is that we all have the right and the privilege of working as a part of who we are and as part of the image of God. He goes beyond that to say then that therefore, because that is a God-given right to be able to work and be productive, therefore, as a society and as fellow human beings, we owe one another the food, the shelter, and the basic medical care to take care of people so that they can work. Right? And so now, like, you go, oh. Because see, now it goes beyond generosity, right? Now all of a sudden, like maybe the vineyard paid those guys their wage for the day, the full day, because then they can pay for their family's food. Now they can pay for the necessities of life. Maybe they need a new pair of sandals so they can come to work the next day, And maybe the landowner knows that if I take care of them, they will be able to take care of us. And as a community together, we will prosper. Right? Because ancient Jewish culture, they also had what was called the year of Jubilee. And every 7 years or so, debts would be forgiven. And I think it was every 7 times 7 years, like every 50th year. There was a year where land would be returned to the family that owned it 50 years prior. So like if your family had a good run and you bought the neighboring farm, according to the Jewish law, I don't know if it was ever actually put into practice, but according to Jewish law, they had a rule that every 50 years, they'd get it back. Right? And so right now, in our current economic system, it's easy to buy more stuff and to buy out other companies if you've already got a big company. Like Amazon buying a new manufacturer, a new retailer, a new logistics company or whatever, it's not a big deal. They've got more money than they know what to do with, right? But what if every 50 years that company that they bought got returned to the family that founded it? And so like, yeah, you can buy it for a while and you can run it for the next 20 years, but their kid's going to get it back in 20 years. Like it changes things, like now it's not about amassing as much as you can to hoard as much as you can and then keep it forever. Now it's more of a community buying and selling back and forth, and it just kind of flows more. And everyone's much more on equal footing. You have responsibilities to one another. That's a very different way of thinking about things. And that's a way that if we pay attention to how ancient cultures saw this versus how we see things now in a capitalist or free market society, super different. I'm already at like 10 minutes. I'm going to speed this up because I actually have 2 more things I wanted to mention. I'll do it fairly quickly. One of the consequences of a free market system is that the value of your labor is set by whatever someone's willing to pay you. which again, it's one of those assumptions that's not super obvious, but we kind of equate the amount of time that we spend times how valuable we are as an employee. Like, hey, I've got, training in programming, which I don't, but my brother does. And so someone's going to hire him for a programming job at way more than they would pay me for a programming job. Because I did some Q basic programming back in elementary school, but I haven't touched it really since, right? So we've kind of gotten used to the idea that we sell our time. And in selling our time, we get our money based on whatever someone thinks we're worth. And I mean, as an economic system, it works pretty well. But as a moral system, it's rough, because if your family doesn't have money and you don't get the training to make your time worth more, you're not going to make as much as your neighbors, and your kids probably aren't going to have the money necessary to go. You know what I mean? It's a system where, again, it kind of perpetuates the differences rather than bringing about the equality that seems to be the biblical mandate there. And so John Chrysostom is one of my favorite patristic theologians, and I'm going to end with one of his quotes and then a quick chat about it. He wrote a homily on 1 Timothy, and I had to track down the original quotation. I first was exposed to it from Shane Claiborne, who is a fantastic dude. He actually did it's a free app you can download on your phone. I super highly recommend it. It's called Common Prayer, and you can download it, and it'll give you 3 prayer services a day that have like links to scripture and stuff right in there. And you can actually set reminders, so you get notified at certain times of the day. And you can choose what times of the day you'd like to be notified for early prayer, like when you wake up, midday prayer, and evening prayer. So one of the quotes from one of his services for Common Prayer from Shane Claiborne, quoting John Chrysostom, who was from 3rd century, way back in the day. John Chrysostom said this: "Tell me then, how is it that you are rich? And from whom did you receive it? And from whom did he transmit it to you?" Well, he got it from his father and his grandfather. But can you, ascending through many generations, show the acquisition to be just? It cannot be. The root and origin of it must have been injustice. Why? Because God in the beginning did not make one person rich and another poor. He left the earth free to all alike. Why then, if it is common, have you so many acres of land while your neighbor has not a portion of it? And so he talks in an old way. So when he says, why then, if it is common, he means common ownership, the way God made it. God made the world and gave it to everyone. We had it in common. So if the earth is common to everyone, we all own it together, then how do you have more land in your ownership than your neighbor? Which again, he's kind of channeling that biblical practice of returning land to the family that had it, to redistribute the wealth, using that phrase on purpose, so that people were on equal footing. And interestingly enough, he says, can you go back and show that the acquisition of that land was just? And he says, it cannot be. And so I didn't want to say those kind of things because I believe them. I think that they are correct. I think that equality amongst all humankind, all of our brothers and sisters, all of the humans that God has created, I think equality among all of us is the goal. Not just equity, not just rewarding, good effort, but disincentivizing people who quote unquote are lazy. I think that equality and provision for everyone is a biblical value. And it's certainly a traditional Christian value. It's something that's been a part of our thing since the beginning, since the book of Acts. The believers would sell property and distribute the wealth to the people in the church, to anyone who had need. And so when we see this parable, we see that this landowner, he's paying everyone the same. I can't help but think that maybe the landowner understood that he didn't own the land for his own benefit. He owned the land knowing that there was also a bunch of other people that lived on or around that same land, and that together the land should provide for all of them, not just him. And so he'll hire anyone he sees, and he'll provide and pay anyone a full day's wage, because he understands that what he owns has been given to him by God, And God intended it to be given to everyone to be held in common, that common ownership. And so what you own is not just for your benefit, but it's for the benefit of your neighbor as well. And that is a radical thought.